was 1954. It was in the City Hall just down the road here. And it was a great day, really. Of course, you've been with 60 people every day for 5 years, and on graduation day, all disperse, and you may never see some of them again. Actually, I've kept in touch with many of them, and in fact, I ran 3 reunions. An earlier one, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, which was a bit of a disaster because a couple of them got roaring drunk, but they're much more civilised in the 90s. We're getting a bit long in the tooth now, some of us, of course. I'm 85 and the rest, and I was the second youngest in the year. In those days, we were only about 60 per year. Of the 60, probably a third were ex-service, because that was just at the end, after the war. So some of them were much older than I was. We had one chap who was 60, in fact, starting, who'd been in the First World War. Not many women, I suppose a quarter women or less than that. The medical school was in Newport Road, the old anatomy department, which had been the Royal Infirmary, and the anatomy department was on the top floor. Preserved bodies we used to dissect right up the top of these stairs. And then the tall building, which is now engineering, was the physiology department. I qualified in 54, and then of course, as now, all new doctors have to do a 1-year pre-registration posts, 2 house jobs in other words. After I'd done those 2 jobs, one in Cardiff, one in Swansea, there was national service in those days, but I managed to stave it off because I then got a job as a senior house officer in Llandoch Hospital in pathology. So that gave me an extra year, but they got me in the end. And in 1956, I had to turn up for national service. And I just got married, so I applied to stay in Britain. So they sent me to Malaya for 3 years. So I spent 3 years as a pathologist in a front hospital like MASH in Malaya. It was marvellous. I'd done 1 year's pathology in Llandoch, and I was running my own lab in the army up in North Malaya and doing post-mortems on terrorists and things. When I came back from Malaya, I got a job in forensic pathology. The reason being was that in one of the early lectures in med school, one of the medical student scientific society lectures and guest lectures, Professor Keith Simpson came from London, who's the leading forensic pathologist. And I went to his 1-hour lecture and I came out saying, I am going to be a forensic pathologist. So I stuck with that. And when I'd finished in the army, I wrote to him and said, have you got a job? And he didn't, but he says, I know a chap who has, sort of thing, Francis Camps. So I went to London Hospital. I remember turning up at the mortuary in full uniform in St Pancras to see Francis Camps, who's another leading pathologist. And he was standing there doing post-mortems with a fag in his mouth. And he said, start on Monday. No question of salary. I haven't a clue how much I was going to get. And I plunged in the next Monday, doing 22 PMs a day sometimes. I was afraid I wouldn't get a consultant medical job because they were hard to come by in those days, not like today. So I thought I'd do the bar exams because some coroners have to be doubly qualified in London, Birmingham, places like that. They need a medical and a legal qualification. And I did the bar then by 1966. But I didn't ever need it really because I got a consultant job in Newcastle on Tyne. I came back from Newcastle here as senior lecturer in forensic pathology, and then eventually 1980 I became professor. I retired as professor in the same room as I'd started as a technician 50 years before. Of course, the cause célèbre, I suppose, almost my swan song, a couple of years before I retired, was the Fred and Rosemary West House of Horror case in Gloucester. I wrote my first book in Malaya when I was in the army. Started writing it because there's not much to do there except drink beer and read the books in the NAFI library. And a lot of these were crime books, and I, as a pathologist, I thought these were rubbish. I could do better than this. So I tried it. I started a book, and then when I was in London, I was in court one day, in the coroner's court, and there's a girl next to me who was a stringer for the Daily Mirror reporter. And I chatted her up a bit and said, I'm writing a detective story. Next day in the Daily Mirror, she'd put a piece in, Forensic Pathologist Writes Thriller. And the next day I had a letter from a publisher saying he'd like to see my manuscript. I'd only written about one chapter. So I finished it and he took it. And it's just been republished a couple of weeks ago in South Wales after all these years. So I carried on writing then. Then I went into historical novels because I'm interested in Welsh history. Then I started the Crown of John series, and that was about a 12th century coroner. I've written about 40 books altogether, including 12 textbooks. These days, of course, there's a public fascination with forensic pathology and medicine, and they get it all wrong. Some programs are better than others. I mean, I was involved quite a bit myself in writing scripts and being an advisor. I did the last series of The Expert in the 70s with Marius Goring, and I wrote the storylines for the last series, but they were so realistic that they took them off. They were so dull. But the public perception is all, well, not the public perception, the television perception is all wrong. I could never watch Silent Witness, to see Amanda Burton, the pathologist, going into prison to interrogate the prisoners and rubbish like that. So it was a bit more realistic stuff I wrote.